The bride's calculated scheme. A novel of betrayal and justice. Just 5 minutes before walking into his dream wedding, the groom accidentally overheard the bride's chilling confession. Her cold words revealed a long-planned scheme, turning their love into a cruel deception. He didn't yell or call off the ceremony immediately. Instead, he walked toward the altar with a serene face, hiding the storm in his heart. No one imagined that, just hours later, under the bright lights of the reception, his silent yet relentless revenge would explode. And when the truth came to light, the entire ballroom fell silent. Everyone wondered what truly began after that instant. The wedding morning began with a festive air in Manhattan, the streets alive with early summer buzz and the chatter of tourists and residents. Ethan Carter arrived at the vestry of St. Patrick's Cathedral with an apparent calmness, though his hands were trembling inside. He adjusted his tie in the mirror and tried to convince himself that everything was as it should be. He remembered Victoria's smile the night before and the way she had looked at him as if she were pure love. But now, that image was tainted with doubt. He didn't yet know why, until he heard a sound in the side corridor. 2 female voices entered the adjoining room, and Ethan, unintentionally, became a witness to a life-changing secret. It was Victoria's voice, clear and firm, mixed with that of Jessica Miller, her friend and maid of honor. What they were saying hit him like a hammer blow. Victoria spoke of money, of deadlines, and of how marriage would give her access to what she needed. Jessica, more shaky, seemed to hesitate, but Victoria reminded her that her family's name had to be saved, and that Ethan was the key. Ethan felt the air grow thick. 3 years of relationship crumbled in seconds. They even mentioned the idea of a future accident, something said in a calculated, cold tone. He stood motionless, holding his breath as the words pierced him. In that instant, he understood that everything had been a plan, and his life was just a piece on someone else's board. The church organ sounded in the distance, a signal that the ceremony was about to begin. The murmur of the guests filtered through the walls, oblivious to the betrayal he had just overheard. Ethan leaned on the table and closed his eyes for a moment. He could walk in, confront them, cancel the wedding, and leave. He had the right and the reason, but he didn't. A voice inside him, perhaps that of his grandfather, who taught him that in the long game, patience is the most lethal weapon, told him it wasn't the time. It wasn't enough to stop the wedding. He had to understand everything, let Victoria sink by her own actions, and avoid tainting himself with a premature scandal. With this new clarity, he took a breath and decided to remain silent. Robert "Rob" Jones, his friend and best man, entered at that moment. He wore a white gardenia on his lapel and a serene smile. "Ready?" he asked naturally. Ethan nodded, though the words stuck in his throat. Rob looked at him intently and added quietly, "To breathe." That everything would turn out as it should. It was a gesture of trust, and Ethan silently appreciated it. He said nothing of what he had heard, but inside, the decision was made. The wedding would not be an ending. It would be the beginning of a larger plan. The priest awaited. The guests were already getting settled, and the music signaled him toward the altar. The city was celebrating its day, and he had to celebrate his, albeit with a script different from the one Victoria had written. The voices from the corridor sounded again. Jessica seemed scared. Victoria responded with confidence. Ethan didn't need more proof. A different man was reflected in his eyes, a man who was no longer naive. He thought of his parents and the way they always taught him to defend what was right with calm and dignity. He swore to himself that he would not let his name or his work be used as currency by those who looked upon him with the scorn of a new money man. That promise gave him strength. Outside, the entrance hymn rose, and the guests waited to see him walk toward the altar. The decision was no longer whether to marry or not, but how to use what he had just discovered to expose the truth without losing his integrity. The moment was unbearable. His hands were sweating, but his gaze was firm. Ethan knew he was facing a theater where everyone would applaud, unaware that the play was full of deceit. He remembered the first time he took Victoria to his studio, and how she hugged him tenderly, feigning admiration for his projects. That memory hurt now more than ever, but it also spurred him on. If he could sustain the charade for a few more minutes, he would have time to think and act. The betrayal wounded him, but it didn't defeat him. His silence was now his best weapon. He would not let her escape. He would not grant her a reaction. On the contrary, he would give her a stage where she would expose herself. The vestry filled with an expectant silence as Ethan adjusted his jacket and prepared to exit. Rob offered him a glass of water, and he drank it slowly, knowing that every second counted. He was a man who, until that day, had lived by trusting, and in a matter of minutes, he had become someone who had to distrust the woman he was about to marry. That inner transformation was tough, but also necessary. He looked one last time in the mirror. He didn't see a defeated man, but one who was preparing for a greater challenge. It was no longer about a wedding. It was about the truth. The singing was heard more strongly, and the guests rose to their feet. Ethan opened the door slowly. He knew that applause, smiles, and cameras awaited him outside. But inside, he carried a secret that would change everything. He clenched the handkerchief in his pocket and remembered what he had just heard. It was not a passing mistake or a cruel joke. It was a calculated plan to ruin him. He had to react, but not immediately. Calmness would be his victory. Victoria would see him smile, but a strategy was hidden behind that smile. He was willing to go ahead, but under his own rules. The murmur of the main nave transformed into a surge of voices and music. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped out. His steps echoed in the aisle as everyone turned to look at him. Inside, the memory of the conversation continued to strike, but it also strengthened him. He repeated to himself that nothing would go unpunished. The ceremony would only be the beginning of something much bigger. His gaze crossed with Rob's, who returned a gesture of support. Victoria awaited him at the end of the aisle with her usual smile, convinced of her triumph. Ethan let none of what he felt show. He just walked, each step firmer than the last, holding within himself the certainty that the story had changed. Ethan looked at the mirror and whispered, "The game has just begun." The guests applauded with emotion, unaware that the groom no longer believed in the bride. Ethan advanced down the central nave of St. Patrick's Cathedral with a firm step, regulating his breathing so that the earthquake running through his chest was not noticeable. The music enveloped the rite, and beyond the doors, the city was alive with the summer hustle. He looked at Victoria, radiant and confident, and promised himself not to miss a single gesture. He remembered his grandfather's words, "In the long game, patience is the most lethal weapon," and he let that phrase set his rhythm. He knew that every second mattered, that the eyes of half of New York were on them, and he decided to act with the coolness he had learned in his years of hard work. The priest greeted them, blessed the couple, and the ceremony began. Victoria responded to every question with impeccable naturalness. She smiled for the cameras, lifted her chin, and sought Ethan's gaze as if nothing in the world troubled her. He held the contact, without allowing the emptiness left by the conversation overheard in the vestry to show. When the moment of the vows arrived, the church fell into a respectful silence. Ethan spoke clearly, with a serenity that confused anyone who didn't know his thoughts. He thanked her for the life shared. He promised to be there. But his words carried a double edge. He did not promise blindly. He promised to guard the truth and protect what he built with his own hands. Victoria nodded as if listening to a poem. No one perceived the hidden layer. The bride pronounced her vows sweetly, emphasized trust, repeated the word future, and everything sounded perfect for the gallery. Rob, from the side, watched intently. He knew his friend and recognized that tense line in his jaw, which only appeared when Ethan made a definitive decision. Mr. David and Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton, in the front with a proud demeanor, exchanged discreet glances of triumph. They felt that the family name breathed again, that the wedding opened doors. Ethan detected the gleam of relief in the father's eyes and kept it in his memory. He also registered the mother's slight jolt when the family name was mentioned, as if confirming a plan. He needed no more. The ceremony continued, and the rite advanced at its own pace. The priest asked for their hands. Ethan brought his close, and, in a gesture that no one interpreted, he lightly brushed the back of Victoria's hand with his thumb, tracing a minuscule X, a sign that only the two of them felt. She looked at him for an instant, surprised by the touch. Then she disguised it and tightened her lips into a perfect smile. To everyone, it was an affectionate detail. To Ethan, it was the intimate signal of his decision, a silent mark reminding him of the path chosen. The choir entered with a soft stanza. Outside, the echo of street music briefly seeped through the half-open door. A couple of tourists peered in curiously and walked away, leaving behind a whisper of comments. Ethan focused again. It was his turn to give the ring. He took it calmly, lifted it for the blessing, and placed it on Victoria's finger with a phrase that sounded loving, and which, internally, was an oath to his own plan. She repeated the gesture. She feigned a tremble of emotion that moved two aunts in the front row. There were tears, handkerchiefs, and discreet applause when the priest invited them to seal their commitment with a kiss. Ethan kissed her measuredly, just enough, and in that contact confirmed the coldness of the deception. Victoria, without realizing it, thought she had won. He maintained the smile. A satisfied murmur was heard, a collective breath, and again the priest's voice called for the final reading. During the brief homily, Ethan traveled through his memory. He saw himself working late at night, shuffling blueprints, dreaming of useful and beautiful buildings. He thought of his mother encouraging him not to lose his calm, of his father teaching him not to boast when things went well. He felt that this upbringing was saving him right now. He didn't want to humiliate anyone. He didn't want a spectacle. He wanted the truth, with clear evidence, if necessary, but without shouting or staining what he still respected about himself. Victoria elegantly repositioned her veil, thanked the priest for his attention with a look, and caused an admired sigh in the friend's pew. Ethan received this scene as a confirmation. The apparent perfection served his plan, because the brighter the backdrop, the louder the fall would sound when the curtain was drawn. He looked at Rob for a second, who responded with the briefest of gestures. No need to speak. The priest returned to the center and asked them to hold hands. Ethan inhaled, approached close enough for her to hear his voice only a few inches away, and whispered a neutral phrase about the beauty of the day. Victoria responded with another predictably tender phrase. There is no battle here, he thought. There is strategy. The mass continued. A ring-bearer got distracted and caused a soft laugh. Ethan's grandmother observed everything with contained emotion. The music returned, announcing the decisive point. The priest, in a solemn tone, pronounced the final formula. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan decided the hunt began. The applause erupted strongly. A photographer requested a pose, then another, and the organist held the chord to accompany the joy. Friends in the second row cheered a timid "Hooray!" that elicited smiles. Victoria raised her bouquet, greeting right and left with the gesture of a kindly queen. Ethan accompanied her courteously, measuring every step. The rite was over. The performance was not. In the aisle toward the exit, Victoria asked him in a low voice if he was okay. He replied yes. Everything was perfect. She thought she heard sincerity. He only offered calm. Mr. Hamilton approached to shake his hand with a comment about the fortune of having him in the family. Mrs. Hamilton added a compliment about the groom's elegance and presented him, with a satisfied tone, to a cousin visiting from Connecticut. Ethan responded politely. Meanwhile, Rob spoke with the priest to organize the exit order. The music changed to a festive tone. An assistant opened the church doors, and the clear sound of the street entered. People waited with rice and petals. Phones were ready. Expectations for the perfect photo were high. Ethan felt the pressure of the scene and held on to his purpose. He would not break the harmony of a day that many had come to celebrate in good faith. The truth, he thought. It will be told. Where appropriate, with proof and without spectacle. The procession began to advance. Victoria rested her hand on Ethan's arm with a confidence that would have been sweet at another time. He guided her serenely. The city received the couple with cheers, and a nearby band let loose with a lively tune. 2 children threw petals early and laughed. The May light fell cleanly onto the steps. Ethan distinguished his work team among the crowd. He saw a client applauding and a neighborhood resident waving. He felt accompanied and at the same time profoundly alone. He didn't take it as a tragedy. He took it as a fact. Only then could he decide correctly. On the threshold, Victoria leaned over to thank some friends, and he took half a second to glance at Rob, who understood the signal and nodded. Everything would take its course. Everything in its time. The exit quickened. The rice flew. The applause redoubled. Victoria turned toward Ethan, seeking the kiss the cameras desired. He granted it discreetly. He thought of the X he had marked on her hand, on the invisible thread that connected her with the recording he didn't yet have, and with the document he hadn't yet signed. He knew he would have to move pieces carefully. There would be no shouting. There would be steps. There would be no scenes. There would be decisions. He looked up and saw the clear sky of Manhattan. He heard another church in the distance also finishing a wedding, and he reaffirmed himself internally. Patience, the truth, the family he would one day truly form. Then he accompanied Victoria toward the stairs, where more photos, more laughter, more wishes awaited. As they left the church under petals, Ethan thought, "You are not the hunter, Victoria. You are the prey." The Plaza Hotel in New York City sparkled with chandeliers and champagne, but beneath the luxury, a trap was hidden. Ethan entered on Victoria's arm, greeted the guests courteously, and measured every look, every word. Ethan remembered Victoria's laugh in the church corridor, like a poisonous echo, and promised himself not to forget that sound when everything seemed perfect. The banquet began with a satisfied murmur. Waiters passed with trays. The master of ceremonies announced the toasts, and Victoria's family occupied the center of the scene, with the composure of those who are regaining their breath. Ethan observed unhurriedly and prepared to listen. He decided that this ballroom was his first home territory. Today, he would not argue. Today, he would take notes. Mr. Hamilton took the floor with a contained joy that showed in his eyes. He spoke of the union of families, of effort, of the future. He named Ethan as the driving force for new times, and his voice received applause. Midas. Hamilton completed the picture with praise for the groom's serenity and the vision that, according to her, would save projects and honors. Ethan thanked them with a brief gesture, and, internally, fixed every phrase in a memory that no longer forgot. The tone did not surprise him. He was interested in the subtext. He listened to how the words positioned his name as a guarantee for accounts to come. At the end of the speech, Mr. Hamilton enthusiastically shook his hand and told him, almost in a whisper, that together they would do great things. Ethan held his gaze and replied that time would put everything in its place. Rob approached at an opportune moment. He spoke to him cordially while showing him the night's program. The essential traveled underneath. Ethan asked him, in a calm voice, to reserve an annex room at the end to review an issue. Rob understood that it was not a whim. He didn't ask. He noted the exact time and promised discretion. Victoria, attentive to every movement, arrived with an impeccable smile and kissed her friend on the cheek. Then she took Ethan's glass and proposed a toast. She spoke of love, trust, and shared projects. The room celebrated. Ethan looked at her and remained silent. In his silence, there was a mirror that he handled with precision. He knew that his apparent docility disarmed suspicions. Jessica, 2 tables away, avoided his gaze. She pretended to adjust an earring. She talked with a cousin. She acted as if she were attending to a waiter. Ethan caught the nervousness and wondered how long it would take for the mask to break. He didn't press her. He knew that guilt works in silence. He followed her with the corner of his eye throughout the first part of the banquet. He saw her approach Victoria to whisper something. He saw her withdraw with a gesture of unease. The measured omniscience with which Ethan conducted himself tonight was not born of resentment. It was born of a purpose. He had promised himself not to lose his dignity. He would let everyone speak. When the truth came out, it would come out on its own. The toasts followed one another with the friendly rhythm of celebrations. An uncle from Boston recalled anecdotes from Victoria's childhood. A college friend repeated a joke that hadn't aged well, and yet managed to get laughs. Ethan participated minimally, laughed moderately, and indulged in the courtesy of greetings. In every conversation, he looked for a clue. He was interested in knowing who knew, who suspected, who kept silent out of interest. He detected 2 cousins who asked about his projects with more financial curiosity than affection. He detected a family associate who threw him an ambiguous phrase about deadlines. He didn't flinch. He took note. His years of work taught him to read between the lines with more precision than any blueprint. Victoria dominated the room with skill. She changed her tone easily, attended to the elders sweetly, winked at the young people, and set the pace. Ethan admired, despite himself, the ability to move freely among different groups. That same ability, he thought, made her dangerous. When there was dancing, she dragged him onto the floor and whispered that everything was going wonderfully. He replied yes, that people were happy. The music lifted half the ballroom. Ethan guided her with precision and distance. She looked at him with an inquisitive spark, as if searching for a crack in his expression. She didn't find it. He let her gain social ground, because every public triumph of Victoria was one step closer to the trap she herself had set. Rob reappeared, this time with a formal excuse. He commented to Ethan that there would be press waiting for a joint photo at the exit, and that it was advisable to have a brief greeting prepared. Ethan said there would be no statements beyond thanking the attendees. Rob added in a lower voice that he had secured the annex room for later. Ethan nodded. Victoria asked what they were talking about, and Rob improvised a joke about schedules and belated birthday cakes. She laughed and left. Rob and Ethan exchanged a clear look deep down. He observed them and immediately lowered his eyes, as if she were embarrassed to be seen. The night progressed. A group of friends proposed a spontaneous toast and spoke of Ethan's generosity. They called him a lifeline in a burst of enthusiasm. Victoria smiled and supported the comment with a pleasant anecdote. Ethan accepted the praise humbly, although internally he registered the weight of that word. Lifeline. It suited him that they said it out loud. That way, when the story was told, no one would say he didn't know what Victoria's family expected. Mr. Hamilton, emboldened by the series of praises, approached later to promise a visit to his Long Island office to study pending projects without delay. Ethan, amiable. He replied that any investment is studied calmly and with paperwork. Mrs. Hamilton intervened to emphasize her son-in-law's seriousness and, unintentionally, let out a sigh of relief. Ethan heard it with a neutral nod. Around him, the party continued. Then a phone rang. It wasn't Ethan's. It wasn't Rob's. It was Victoria's, who took out her mobile with an automatic gesture and, seeing the screen, turned pale. The change, slight but real, reached Jessica's eyes before anyone else's. Victoria stepped 2 paces away. She tried to answer in a low voice. She nodded. She shook her head. She pressed her lips together. Ethan didn't move. He looked without looking. He heard only one clear phrase amidst the noise of the room. Friday is the final deadline. Victoria closed her eyes for half a second, hung up, and recomposed her smile with learned dexterity. She returned to the table as if nothing had happened and proposed a family photo. Mr. Hamilton asked if everything was all right. She said yes. It was a trifle. Jessica attended to her with trembling hands. Ethan identified the crack he had waited for. He knew that a call like that doesn't come in the middle of a party if there's no urgency. The deadline was a fact, and Friday, a boundary. He looked at Rob, and he indicated with a minimal gesture that it was time to step away for a moment. They did it carefully. In the annex room, Ethan told him that the pressure was real, that time was running out, and that he needed to proceed with finesse. He asked him to make 2 lists, people and documents. He also asked him to locate Jessica without alarming her, to invite her to have coffee the next day. Rob asked if he trusted her. Ethan replied that he trusted her conscience when she was given a way out. They wouldn't force her. They would listen to her and offer her options. The word family returned to his head, not as a possession, but as a refuge. He wouldn't allow himself to be dragged into the mud. He wanted a clean truth. They returned to the ballroom. Victoria had regained the center with a light joke about grooms escaping from photos. The guests applauded. Someone called for another toast. The master of ceremonies approached them with full glasses. Ethan held his, and before raising it, scanned the table with a look that fixed positions. Mr. Hamilton displayed a relief camouflaged as pride. Mrs. Hamilton maintained her composure, although her eyelid barely trembled. Jessica avoided his eyes again, but this time she seemed more determined to approach. Rob took his place with the discretion of a shadow. Everything was where it should be. Ethan raised his glass, smiled at the group, and thought, "Time is running out, and not for me. On a sunny terrace, a cup of coffee can change the course of a life." The morning after the banquet, New York woke up with that light pulse of festival days, and Greenwich Village breathed calm among sleepy tourists and early-rising residents. Ethan arrived early at a discreet West Village cafe, chose a discreet table, and placed his phone face down. He didn't want surprises. He wanted to listen. He had spent the night awake ordering ideas, reviewing every gesture of the banquet, the thread of the call that had left Victoria frozen, the way Jessica avoided looking at him. He needed a witness, but not a forced one. He needed the truth, told by someone who had walked too close to the deception and still maintained a conscience. His grandfather's phrase returned to his head without asking permission. Patience is the most lethal weapon, and he clung to it like a handrail. Jessica appeared with dark glasses and a step that revealed tiredness. She stopped 2 yards away, as if evaluating the distance for escape. Ethan stood up to greet her and offered her a seat with a kind gesture. She hesitated, sat on the edge of the chair, left her purse on her lap, and indicated that she could stay for a short time. She didn't want coffee at first. She changed her mind when she noticed her voice coming out rough and asked the waiter for a latte. The silence between them was not hostile. It was the silence of someone searching for words that wouldn't hurt. Ethan explained that he had invited her without the intention of judging her. He said that he only wanted to understand what he had heard in the vestry and if the call during the banquet was related to something that could harm him. Jessica lowered her gaze, ran a finger along the edge of the cup, and replied that she shouldn't be there, that she should be back on Long Island, and that this was a mistake. Ethan didn't insist. He remembered like an echo Victoria's laugh in the church corridor, that poisonous echo that still buzzed in his ears, and returned to the present calmly. The purpose of the meeting was not to extract a confession. It was to offer a way out. Ethan knew this and said it clearly. If there were pressures, if Victoria's family was in debt, if a third party was pressing deadlines, he preferred to know about it cleanly. Jessica raised her eyes with a dry gesture. She asked why he wanted to know that. Ethan replied that he wanted to protect his work, his name, and, if possible, help ensure that no one else sank because of decisions they hadn't made. He didn't promise anything he couldn't deliver. He put the option of legal advice with Rob on the table for any matter affecting Jessica or her family. He assured her that he wasn't seeking blind revenge, but the truth. The square became lively with a group passing by singing a light-hearted song. An older couple ordered 2 beers at the next table and talked about grandchildren. That quiet background sustained the dialogue. Jessica admitted that last night's call had been important. She didn't mention names. She only said that there was a deadline on Friday. Ethan didn't react theatrically. He mentioned that he had heard the date and that he didn't need to know the figure, only the scope. Then Jessica began to tell the story in fragments. She spoke of a real estate project of Victoria's family that had fallen through. She spoke of guarantees signed by Mr. Hamilton in better times, and of a loan shark who no longer accepted excuses. She spoke of the pressure that seeped through the cracks until the engagement became an imposition. Ethan asked if Victoria had planned the marriage as a way out. Jessica tightened the cup and nodded. The progression of the conversation was slow, but steady. Ethan did not interrupt with reproaches, only with questions that placed the pieces. Since when? Who knew? What was Jessica's role? She confessed that she had helped draft email drafts, and that she had transmitted messages without initially understanding the dimension of the damage. Over time, she said, she understood that the relationship between Victoria and Ethan was not love, but a strategy. She had wanted to believe otherwise, but reality prevailed, especially when she heard mention of a possible accident on a winter trip. That's when she knew she had to leave, but she was already neck-deep, with her own father threatened by the closure of the family's small restaurant. Ethan listened to that last detail with a gesture of genuine compassion. He asked about the restaurant, the debt, and the possibility of going to a reputable bank. Jessica explained that the deadlines had crossed and that when they wanted to rectify, they were already in the hands of someone who doesn't forgive. The breaking point came when Ethan spoke of responsibility without pointing a finger. He said that justice is not fixed with shouting, but with proof, and that a testimony could prevent a greater evil. He promised, within his reach, and within the law, to protect Jessica from reprisals if she decided to speak. He asked her to stop being an accomplice, to choose her own family. She asked him if he thought she deserved forgiveness. Ethan replied that forgiveness was not a prize, it was a task. He said that he himself was learning not to fill himself with resentment, and that he needed clear facts so as not to harm the innocent. Jessica swallowed. She admitted, almost in a whisper, that she had accidentally recorded a conversation with Victoria the previous week, thinking that this would cover her if things went wrong. She wasn't sure of the audio quality, but it existed. The climax of the meeting was reached when Jessica, with watery eyes, said that she couldn't keep looking the other way. She declared that she was tired of being her accomplice, and that, if Ethan promised her that the truth would not destroy her family, she would take the step. Ethan was honest. He assured her that he could not promise zero consequences, but he could promise a path with law and respect. He proposed meeting that afternoon with Rob to listen to the recording in a safe environment. He added that, if the audio was useful, it would be solid proof to stop any attempt at harm and to force Victoria's family to answer for their actions. Jessica nodded, took a deep breath, and rested her forehead on her hand for a second, like someone internally signing a decision. The waiter approached to ask if they wanted anything else. Both shook their heads. Jessica asked for the bill, and Ethan stepped forward with a card. She tried to object. He said that this coffee was for her peace of mind. She smiled barely, grateful and ashamed. Then, in a more practical tone, they organized the next steps. Rob would wait for them at his office mid-afternoon. Jessica would send a coded message beforehand to confirm that she wasn't being followed. If something strange happened, they would cancel and look for another place the next day. Ethan insisted that she not put anyone at risk. She assured him that she would know how to move. Before getting up, Jessica looked out at the open square and confessed that she hadn't slept well for months, that fear and lies clung to her skin. Ethan told her that that feeling would end when she started telling the truth. In the final stretch of the conversation, Jessica asked if Ethan was still in love. He didn't answer with great eloquence. He said that love does not survive manipulation, and that right now what remained was a mixture of mourning and self-care. He said that he did not want to destroy for the sake of destruction, that he wanted to close the story without becoming someone he didn't recognize. Jessica commented that she never saw him lose his calm, and that perhaps that was why Victoria underestimated him. Ethan explained that calm was not weakness, it was a style of survival, and that, if there was one thing he wanted to save, it was the idea of a future family in which trust was not currency. They got up almost at the same time. Jessica put her glasses in her purse and said that she would be with Rob at 5. Ethan offered to accompany her to the subway. She politely declined. She preferred to walk alone for a few minutes to clear her head. They said goodbye with a handshake that was more eloquent than any speech. Jessica walked away down the sidewalk with steps that were still uncertain, but increasingly direct. Ethan followed her with his gaze until she turned the corner. He sat down again. He took the latte that had already cooled and let the buzz of the square bring him back to his center. There was contained crying, yes, but also a door opened to repair. The first obstacle is always admitting. The second is sustaining the decision. Ethan looked at the foam of his latte and thought, the first crack is already open. When debts come knocking, they do not do so courteously. Jessica revealed that the Hamilton family owed money to dangerous men, and the echo of that truth arrived at the Long Island mansion like a blunt blow before noon. Victoria walked down the central corridor of the old mansion with contained haste. She looked for Mr. Hamilton in the study and found him standing, looking at a calendar as if the days could be stretched by willpower. Mrs. Hamilton, sitting with her back very straight, maintained a fragile serenity. Victoria wasted no time. She announced that they would receive a visit. She said the name without embellishment, Frank Valenti, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Mr. Hamilton cleared his throat. He spoke of honors, of promises, of solutions that always arrived in extremis, but his voice fooled no one. Mrs. Hamilton asked her daughter to control her pulse and to remember that a family name should not bow its head. Victoria nodded with a new harshness, the harshness of someone who no longer wants to see herself as a museum piece, and pointed with her index finger to the date that was suffocating them. Friday. There were few days left, and the wedding had not brought the immediate relief they imagined, because Ethan, polite and correct, did not release anything without paperwork, and Rob, the lawyer, moved like a silent dam containing any leak. Mr. Hamilton muttered that the son-in-law should understand the family situation, that he was not a stranger, that ties obligate to Miss Hamilton recommended prudence, the modesty of someone who asks without begging, and repeated under her breath that, whatever happened, no one should see them kneeling. Victoria put her phone in her dress pocket, took a deep breath, and prepared for the clash. Valenti arrived without a visible escort, with the calm of someone who knows that he doesn't need to shout to be heard. He greeted them with minimal courtesy, asked if they could talk without interruptions, and when Mr. Hamilton closed the door, he got straight to the point. He did not speak of sector crises or misfortunes. He spoke of commitments, of numbers, of missed deadlines, and of interest that would no longer stop. Victoria tried to steer the conversation toward the bright future that the alliance with Ethan would bring. She mentioned projects and prospective contracts, and said that it was a matter of days, perhaps hours, for everything to fall into place. Valenti listened to her, and when she finished, he repeated the word days with a gesture that was not mockery, but verification. Then he said that his patience was running out, that family stories did not change balances, and that Friday was not a rhetorical figure. It was the day he would come with definitive solutions, if there was no payment. Mr. Hamilton inflated his voice with wounded pride. He spoke of the weight of the Hamilton name in the region, of tradition, of favors they had given and received. Valenti was neither offended nor impressed. He replied that names carry weight when they provide backing, and that, if there is no backing, family names become mere dinner-table memories. Mrs. Hamilton intervened politely, asked for 72 hours, assured him that they were not fleeing, but were organizing, and offered a formal meeting to show guarantees. Valenti agreed to see papers, but made it clear that he would not accept the same old songs. Victoria felt the back of her neck tense. She thought of Ethan as one thinks of a lifeline, and she was surprised at herself for asking about the possibility of a small postponement if they presented a signed power that would unlock funds. Valenti fixed his eyes on her with an interest that was not personal, but accounting, and said that a real operative power, verifiable today and usable tomorrow, that would count. Mr. Hamilton, who had avoided mentioning his son-in-law directly, could no longer remain silent, and assured him that the signature would arrive. Valenti nodded and said that, if the signature was authentic, Friday would only be a brief visit. The mansion seemed to hear and keep every word. Victoria, to regain initiative, enumerated assets, described a patrimony that was more symbolic than liquid, and promised to sell whatever was necessary. Valenti did not correct. He did not press with volume. He asked about Jessica's father's restaurant. He asked about a mortgaged apartment in Manhattan. He asked about a lot in the Hamptons, and he showed that he knew more than they expected. Mr. Hamilton blinked. Mrs. Hamilton maintained her composure and asked to speak privately with her husband. Valenti accepted 5 minutes, went out into the hall, and left the door ajar. Inside, the discussion was brief. Mr. Hamilton reproached them for mixing up third-party affairs. Eleanor reminded him that the loan shark made no distinctions. Victoria took command. She said that the only way was to get Ethan's signature, a power that would open the tap for them, and that she would ensure that the lawyer did not smell the urgency. Mr. Hamilton objected out of decorum. Mrs. Hamilton objected out of pride, but both knew that they were running out of cards. They called Valenti back and confirmed that they would present documentation before Friday. Valenti, without the slightest theatricality, replied that he would take that promise as a last chance. Fear did not enter as panic. It entered as tight calculation. The servants moved carefully, looked at each other, and kept silent. In the halls, loose phrases were exchanged, that the city was already commenting, that the name couldn't withstand another stumble, that New York doesn't forgive the smell of defeat. Victoria toured the house with long strides, and her head held high, but inside, she carried a clock with broken hands. She called Manhattan and couldn't reach Ethan. She called Rob and left a polite message, proposing to stop by the office to sign a couple of post-wedding formalities. Nothing urgent, pure order. Then she spoke with Jessica, with a poisoned tone of cordiality. She asked about her father, offered a small help as a balm, and measured every syllable of the answer. Jessica replied politely and promised nothing. Victoria hung up with clenched teeth, aware that the young woman no longer obeyed as before. Then she went to find her mother. Mrs. Hamilton understood better than anyone the balance between appearance and need. She told her daughter to learn from softness, that sometimes signatures were obtained with a sincere smile and genuine concern, not with orders. Victoria replied that she didn't have time for charm exercises, that every minute counted, that Ethan was becoming a wall, and that Rob smelled desperation like a bloodhound. Eleanor asked her to sit down and listen. She spoke to her of the dignity that is not negotiated, but also of the intelligence that is not immolated. She suggested that she talk to Ethan about a common plan, that she dress up the urgency as normality, that she not name figures, and that she appeal to the care of the new family. Victoria quickly bit into the idea. The new family. The argument sounded acceptable on the lips of a newlywed. She got up decisively. She asked her mother to take care of entertaining Mr. Hamilton with protocol calls. She was going to Manhattan. Before leaving, Valenti claimed his last intervention. He had returned to the study with the punctuality of a notary. He asked that no one harbor illusions with excuses. He calmly announced his agenda. He said that on Friday he would return at the same time, that he expected tangible solutions, and that, if they did not appear, he would initiate procedures that could not be stopped with tears. No one replied. Victoria held his gaze and said that she would understand whatever happened, but that they would not fail him. Valenti looked at her for a second longer, like someone recording data, and headed for the exit. Passing by Mr. Hamilton, he greeted him with sober respect. He was briefer with Mrs. Hamilton. On the threshold, he stopped to adjust his watch and left a phrase that weighed on everyone like a final seal. "I will return on Friday, and I don't like to wait." The door closed without a slam. The hall breathed deeply. Victoria pressed the mobile phone with her right hand until she felt the phantom vibration of a call that didn't arrive. Her pulse was trembling, but she didn't allow herself to falter. She knew that she could no longer count on half measures. She had to fabricate normality with Ethan in less than 24 hours. She had to get through Rob's office without raising alarms. She had to remember every gesture of Ethan, his compassion, his care for the Word family, and turn all that into a lever. She walked back toward the study where her parents remained without speaking. Mr. Hamilton had a late burst of pride. He said that he would go out and look for the money if necessary. Mrs. Hamilton extinguished the false bravery with a touch on his forearm. It was the daughter who knew the way to the soft heart of the son-in-law. Victoria breathed through her nose and nodded. She could not allow herself a second of doubt. The house murmured around her with ancient echoes, but she only heard the trail of the date burning in her head. Friday. She made 2 calls. She coordinated a trip. She ordered a car. She stood alone in front of the window, with the flat light of the afternoon etched on her face, and she finally let slip a phrase that did not sound like a plea. It sounded like an order directed at the life she had chosen. "Ethan, you will have to sign." Love is written in verses, but betrayal is signed in papers. After Valenti's threat, Victoria understood that she had to move quickly and began to prepare a power of attorney that would allow her to access what Ethan had. That same afternoon, in Manhattan, Ethan and Rob Jones were reviewing documents in the lawyer's office, a space smelling of fresh coffee and the constant buzz of Midtown below the window. Ethan reviewed the facts of the last few days over and over. He was not looking for solace. He was looking for strategy. Rob, with the patience hardened by litigation, listened to him without interrupting, and he nodded when necessary. The lawyer knew that time was running out, that the Hamilton family was desperate, and that Victoria would soon appear with a paper designed to trap him. Ethan spoke coldly. He said that words or suspicions were not enough. They needed evidence to sustain any accusation. Rob agreed. He explained that the law only acts with documents, recordings, or solid testimonies. Ethan then remembered Jessica's confession and the promise of an audio that could become the key. Still, they needed another piece. Victoria's own mistake. A hurried signature, a legal oversight, a document that would turn against her. Rob opened a folder and showed a draft he had been preparing for days. It was a power of attorney with hidden clauses of shared responsibility. Anyone who signed it without reading carefully was exposed to having to answer with all their assets if bad faith was demonstrated. Ethan reviewed it calmly and smiled without joy. It was the necessary trap. In the middle of the conversation, the office doorbell rang. The secretary announced that Victoria Hamilton asked to enter. Ethan felt a slight blow to his stomach, but he didn't let it show. Rob nodded and invited her to pass. Victoria entered with a sure step, an impeccable dress, and a practiced smile. She greeted them with familiarity, praised the view from the window, and feigned interest in the stacked files. Ethan observed her without uttering a reproach. He waited for her to take out the papers. She did so with a rehearsed naturalness. She extended a document and said that they were simple formalities to update contracts and expedite payments. She called it a mere formality. Ethan took it, glanced at it without showing surprise, and in a calm voice commented that any signature must first go through the lawyer. Victoria feigned surprise. Then she shrugged and said that of course she trusted Rob. The lawyer read carefully. He discovered clauses drafted hastily and evident legal traps. He kept his thoughts to himself and said that it was better to unify those procedures with others that he himself was organizing. He proposed preparing a joint document for the next morning. That way, everyone would be calm. Victoria did not protest. She only asked for speed. Ethan then suggested immediately signing a general power of attorney to simplify. He took out the draft that Rob had prepared and placed it on the table naturally. He said that this would avoid delays and that the marriage would begin without misunderstandings. Victoria, anxious to close the matter, did not hesitate. She asked if it was safe. Rob replied yes, that it was a balanced power, designed for marriages seeking transparency. Victoria quickly skimmed it, rushed through the pages, and took the pen. The tension of the moment was invisible to anyone who did not know the truth. Ethan watched her as she signed, not with hatred, but with a cold serenity. He knew that that signature would be the proof of her greed and her carelessness. Victoria stamped her signature with a victorious gesture. She returned the document and commented that everything was finally in order. Ethan smiled politely, kissed her on the cheek, and said he was happy to start their life together with clarity. Victoria accepted the phrase as a compliment. She did not perceive the trap. She got up quickly, thanked Rob, and said goodbye with the promise that everything would be resolved in a few days. When the door closed, Rob exhaled forcefully. He looked at Ethan and murmured that there was no turning back. Ethan nodded. He knew that that power of attorney contained the seed of the outcome. Now all that remained was to wait for the rest of the pieces to fall into place. Jessica had to keep her word and deliver the recording. Valenti would return on Friday and demand answers, and he, Ethan, had to remain calm until the last second. The conversation between the two extended for a few more minutes. Rob insisted on the need to protect every detail, to keep copies, and not to take false steps. Ethan listened and agreed. He said there was no rush for revenge, that the important thing was for the truth to impose itself with undeniable evidence. Then he fell silent and looked out the window. The avenue was bustling with its usual rhythm, cars and pedestrians oblivious to the silent war being waged a few floors above. He thought how ironic it was. While the city celebrated holidays and raised glasses, he was preparing the collapse of a lie built with so much care. When the office was calm, Ethan took the signed document and put it in a folder marked with neutral initials. He observed it for an instant and remembered the words he had repeated to himself since the vestry. He would not act with rage. He would act with method. The echo of Victoria's voice, convinced of her own victory, still sounded in his ears. But this time, he had the certainty that the game had changed owners. That night, returning home, he mentally reviewed every movement. He knew that the day had been a turning point. Victoria thought she had gained time. He knew he had sealed her fate. With the calm learned from years of effort, he prepared his agenda for the next day. He sent a message to Rob confirming the meeting with Jessica and allowed himself a minimal smile. The trap was already set. Victoria, blinded by greed and haste, accepted without suspecting. And Ethan, with the document in hand, thought that the truth always finds its way, even in the midst of the most careful deception. Rob, seeing Victoria's signature on the papers, murmured, "There's no turning back now. A number on a paper can blind even the most calculating heart." 2 days after Victoria's visit to Rob's office, the pieces began to move quickly. The Hamilton family felt the clock ticking every minute, and Valenti's pressure was becoming unbearable. Victoria walked through the Manhattan apartment she now shared with Ethan, with the urgency of someone seeking a crack. She gathered the documents she had prepared and waited for the opportune moment to present them again. Ethan, with the serenity provided by having set the trap, feigned domestic calm. He spoke of pending appointments, client calls, and small everyday details. Victoria, listening, barely paid attention. The only thing she wanted was to see his signature stamped on a power that would free her from the threat. Ethan remembered Rob's recommendation. Don't rush. Let greed do the work. That morning, as they had breakfast in silence, Victoria broke the ice. She sweetly asked if they could move forward with the procedures. She said she would be excited to make everything clear from the start, so they could live without shadows. Ethan looked her in the eyes and replied yes, that it was the most sensible thing. He took a folder and pulled out the draft that Rob had prepared. He presented it as a balanced legal power, useful for simplifying common procedures. Victoria leaned over the papers anxiously, skimmed the pages without reading them, and asked if it was safe. Ethan replied that it was, that they were together to share everything, for better or for worse. Those last words were said in such a neutral tone that Victoria did not detect the hidden edge. The scene progressed like an invisible script. Rob, present as a witness, explained that it was a routine procedure whose validity he personally guaranteed. Victoria breathed a sigh of relief, took the pen, and signed with a victorious gesture. The security of someone who believes they have regained control was drawn on her face. Ethan watched her in silence, aware that every stroke of ink was irrefutable proof of her haste and her ambition. He felt no joy, only the certainty that he had achieved the step he needed. Victoria returned the papers to Rob and said confidently that now they could move forward. She spoke of future projects, trips, and investments, as if the world had suddenly opened up again beneath her feet. Ethan did not interrupt her. He smiled politely and nodded at every word, while internally guarding the image of that signature as a decisive weapon. The atmosphere among the three was permeated with tense calm. Rob carefully closed the folder, put it in a portable safe, and noted the exact time of the signature. Ethan asked Victoria to relax, to enjoy the day, that not everything in life was papers and debts. She hugged him effusively, believing she had conquered his definitive trust. Ethan responded with controlled coldness. He knew that the battle was not yet won. Proofs that Jessica had to deliver were missing, and the public confrontation was still pending, but the central piece was already in his hands. Greed had done the work. Hours later, Victoria called her parents with enthusiasm. She told them that everything was resolved, that Ethan's signature gave her access to what they needed. Mr. Hamilton sighed with relief. Mrs. Hamilton thanked her with words loaded with pride, and both were convinced that the storm had calmed. No one in that family imagined that the document was a trap carefully designed to sink them. Victoria celebrated with a glass of wine, toasted alone in the living room, and convinced herself that she had saved the family name. Ethan, meanwhile, reviewed the plans for a new project in his studio, but his mind was not on the lines of the buildings. He thought of Jessica, of the pending meeting, of the promised audio. He knew that he could not sustain the truth with papers alone. He needed Victoria's voice betraying herself. The afternoon fell over Manhattan, and Rob's phone vibrated with a brief message. It confirmed that Jessica was ready to meet the next day with the recording. Ethan felt a contained relief. Everything was aligning. Victoria, oblivious to this coordination, prepared to travel to Long Island with the intention of showing confidence before Valenti. Ethan did not stop her. He knew that every step she took with excessive confidence brought her closer to her downfall. That night, as she talked about plans and projects, he listened in silence, maintaining the calm of someone who waits for the precise moment. Friday was approaching, and with it the finish line. Victoria thought in numbers. He thought in justice. Victoria believed she had secured her victory. He knew he had sealed her fate. The climax arrived when Victoria, with the signed document, looked Ethan in the eyes and told him that she finally trusted that everything would turn out well. He held her gaze without blinking and replied yes, that now they shared everything. She understood love. He understood condemnation. The contrast was brutal, and yet invisible to anyone who saw them from outside. Ethan stood up, remained silent for a few seconds, and then changed the subject naturally. He did not want her to notice anything strange. The important thing was already done. There was no turning back. Victoria went to sleep, convinced that she had won the game. Ethan stayed a little longer in his studio, mentally reviewing every move. He had waited for this moment since the vestry, when he heard the plan that made him a victim. Now, with the signature stamped, he knew that the balance was tipping to his side. He smiled without joy, with the weight of someone who understands that victory does not bring happiness, but responsibility. He looked at the clock and thought of Valenti, of Jessica, of Friday. The game was still on, but the trap was closed. Victoria signs with a victorious gesture, unaware that she has just sealed her fate. Ethan looks at the document and thinks, that's it. The net is closed. Sometimes, walls listen and record. The afternoon after the signing, Jessica accepted the appointment that Ethan and Rob had proposed. The chosen place was a discreet cafe in Greenwich Village, far from the hustle and bustle of luxury ballrooms and curious eyes. The neighborhood offered anonymity, mixed voices, and distant guitar music. Jessica arrived punctually, nervous, with the recorder hidden in her purse. Ethan sat at a nearby table, pretending to read a newspaper. Rob waited a few yards away, attentive to his mobile phone to receive any signal. The plan was simple: to let Victoria talk with her trusted friend, provoke her with questions, and get confirmation of the deception from her own lips. Jessica took deep breaths, trying not to betray her tension, while waiting for Victoria's arrival. Victoria appeared shortly after, with the same studied confidence she always showed. She approached Jessica with a brief hug and a smile that seemed sincere. She greeted her, ordered a coffee, and sat across from her. Jessica tried to remain calm, remembered every instruction from Ethan, and formulated the first question in a casual tone. She wanted to know how things were going after the wedding, if the plans were advancing. Victoria, confident, responded with disdain. She said that everything was going as planned, that Ethan had signed the necessary powers, and that soon she would be able to use his assets as a basis to settle accounts. Jessica feigned surprise and asked again in a low voice if it wasn't risky. Victoria let out a soft laugh. She explained that Ethan trusted her, that he suspected nothing, and that everything built over 3 years was worth it now that the family name was safe. Jessica took small sips of her coffee to hide her trembling. She looked toward the street from time to time, as if afraid of being discovered, but continued with calculated questions. She touched on the subject of Valenti, like someone recalling a rumor, and asked if the thing about Friday was really true. Victoria lowered her voice and replied yes, that that man did not forgive delays, and that thanks to Ethan's signature, everything would be covered. Then, without measuring the danger, she confessed that she had even considered the possibility of a future accident, a quick way out if things got complicated. Jessica felt a chill. The recorder captured every word. It was the evidence they needed. Meanwhile, Ethan, from his table, pretended to read, but listened to every word. He maintained his serenity, although his heart pounded hard inside. Rob, with the earpiece connected to his mobile, received the audio live and nodded in silence. The tension grew because a single slip from Jessica was enough for Victoria to suspect. However, the conversation flowed naturally. Victoria felt superior. She thought she dominated the situation and spoke without filters. She assured her that, in a few days, Ethan would not even understand how he had been left with nothing. Jessica intervened with a worried tone. She told her she was afraid, that this could end badly. Victoria placed a hand on her arm and assured her that when everything was over, they would live peacefully, and that Ethan would never find out anything. The climax came when Jessica, following the agreed script, asked what would happen if Ethan discovered the truth. Victoria replied without hesitation. She said that he was too trusting, that his silence condemned him, and that even if he suspected something, it was already too late. Jessica contained her tears, aware that she was listening to the cruelest betrayal. The recorder continued to work. Ethan, from his spot, calmly closed the newspaper, as if nothing, and slowly got up to pay the bill. The trap was consummated. The truth had come out of Victoria's mouth, without pressure, without threats, just by overconfidence. When the conversation ended, Victoria got up with a triumphant smile and said that she had to leave. She hugged Jessica, asked her to continue supporting her, and left the cafe as if she had just closed a good deal. Jessica remained paralyzed for a few seconds, looking at the door through which her friend had left. Her hands trembled. Guilt and relief mixed on her face. Ethan returned to his table and approached her with serenity. He thanked her in a low voice, told her that she had done the right thing, and that from that moment on, she was not alone. Jessica nodded, with tears in her eyes. Rob entered at that moment, saved the file in a secure copy, and firmly shook Jessica's hand. Everything had been recorded. The cafe filled again with murmurs and other conversations. No one in the place suspected what had just happened. Jessica left accompanied by Ethan, breathing with difficulty, but relieved to have broken the silence. As they walked through the narrow streets of Greenwich Village, Ethan assured her that he did not judge her, that he understood the pressure she had endured, and that the most important thing was that there was now a path to justice. Jessica nodded with a brief gesture. She knew that she couldn't erase what had been done, but she had started to repair it. A murmur escaped her voice, almost a prayer, asking for forgiveness for the time she had remained silent. That night in Rob's office, they listened to the complete recording. Victoria's voice was clear, unmistakable, enough to sustain any accusation. Ethan remained silent throughout the audio, his eyes fixed on the table. He didn't need to repeat what he had heard in the vestry. Now he had the proof that confirmed everything. Rob stated that with that they could initiate a legal process, that there was no possibility of escape for Victoria. Jessica cried in silence, liberated and scared at the same time. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder and told her it was time to let go of the fear. The first part of the battle was won. Leaving the office, Ethan looked at the dark Manhattan sky and understood that there was no longer room for doubt. He had the documents, and he had the voice. The truth needed no more embellishment. Jessica said goodbye, promising that she would continue to cooperate. Ethan thanked her with a serenity that flowed from his soul. She left with uncertain steps, but increasingly free. Ethan remained looking at the street illuminated by lampposts and smiled with deep exhaustion. The path had been hard, but the truth was finally in his hands. Jessica, after saying goodbye, trembles and murmurs, "May God forgive me." Before hundreds of eyes, a hidden truth can turn into thunder. Friday arrived, and with it, the most important date of Ethan's life. The Manhattan's Grand Summit Hall was filled early with architects, entrepreneurs, journalists, and public figures. No one suspected that the day would not be remembered for the models or the presentations, but for the denouement of a farce. Ethan walked with a serene step toward the main stage, dressed with his usual sobriety, without a gesture that betrayed the inner storm. Victoria sat in the front row, surrounded by her parents. With an expression of triumph, she believed that everything was controlled. She did not know that every word of hers, said days earlier in Greenwich Village, was about to become her condemnation. Ethan began the presentation speaking about sustainable architecture. He showed plans, explained ideas, and answered questions calmly. The audience listened to him attentively and applauded every proposal. It was the same Ethan as always, dedicated to his craft, a man who spoke with passion about projects that benefited the city. No one could imagine that this speech was the prelude to a brutal turn. Rob, from the side, waited with a briefcase containing copies of the signed power and the audio file recorded by Jessica. The police, warned in advance, waited outside the venue, ready to enter upon receiving the signal. Jessica, hidden among the public, watched nervously. She knew that that day not only Victoria's destiny was at stake, but also her own, because she had decided to break the silence and tell the truth. Ethan paused the presentation at the right moment. He let the auditorium breathe for an instant and announced that he wanted to share something personal, something that exceeded architecture. The murmur grew. The cameras got ready. Ethan spoke about the importance of trust, of what it means to build with solid foundations, not only buildings, but also human relationships. His words changed tone, acquiring a different weight. Then he looked toward the giant screen and asked for a file to be played. The hall fell into absolute silence. Victoria's voice sounded clear, unmistakable. She spoke of Ethan as if he were a tool. She confessed the plan to use him to save her family and mentioned Valenti and the Friday threat. Every sentence was a knife. The audience looked at each other, surprised. Some recorded with their mobiles. Others put their hands to their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. Victoria reacted violently. She stood up abruptly, shouted that it was a trap, that everything was manipulated. Mr. Hamilton tried to hold her arm, but she pushed him away. Mrs. Hamilton tried to silence the audience with gestures, imploring calm, but no one paid attention. Everyone looked toward the stage, where Ethan remained standing, serene, like a judge showing irrefutable evidence. Rob handed the documents to the moderator, who showed them to the cameras. They were the papers that Victoria had signed without reading, with the clauses that made her jointly and severally responsible for any fraud. The auditorium exploded in comments and exclamations. The truth had become public, and there was no way to stop it. The climax reached its highest point when the side doors opened and NYPD officers entered. They walked with a firm step toward the front. Victoria backed away, shook her head, and sought support from her parents. Mr. Hamilton, in a last attempt at pride, raised his voice to defend her. He said that his daughter had been manipulated, that everything was a fabrication to stain the Hamilton name. No one believed him. The murmurs grew and turned into a sea of rejection. Victoria shouted that she would not sign anything else, that she was a victim of a conspiracy. The police approached, and one of them pronounced the words that sealed the young woman's fate. Victoria Hamilton is being detained for attempted fraud and conspiracy. The echo of that phrase ran through the hall like a thunderclap that left no doubt. The photographers fired relentlessly. The cameras captured every gesture. Victoria struggled for a few seconds, then lowered her arms resignedly, aware that there was no way out. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton remained standing, rigid, with lost looks. The family's dignity was crumbling in public, in front of those who had applauded them until yesterday. Jessica, among the crowd, cried silently. She knew she had contributed to that moment, but she also knew she had done the right thing. Ethan sought her out with his gaze, found her, and gave her a slight gesture of gratitude. She lowered her head, relieved and broken at the same time. The auditorium did not stop commenting on what had happened. Many spoke of justice, others of betrayal. Some simply repeated in disbelief the phrases they had just heard in the recording. Ethan resumed the floor when the police escorted Victoria out of the venue. He said that architecture had taught him that everything built on false foundations sooner or later collapses. He said that the same thing happens with life and with trust. He was not looking for applause. He was looking to close a cycle. He thanked those who supported him, thanked the patience of those who trusted his work, and concluded that the important thing was not the noise of the collapse, but the possibility of building anew with solid foundations. The audience listened to him with respect, and sincere applause, different from the initial one, filled the room. It was not festive applause. It was applause of recognition. Victoria was taken to a police vehicle. Mr. Hamilton tried to follow her, but the officers prevented him. Mrs. Hamilton, with contained tears, leaned on her husband's arm. Both understood that their family's history had changed forever. There would no longer be parties with triumphant laughter, only bitter memories of a family name that had sunk due to ambition. Ethan left the stage accompanied by Rob. In the hallway, Jessica reached him and told him that she didn't know if she could sleep that night. Ethan replied that at least she could sleep without fear, that was what counted. Jessica nodded and said goodbye. The day had ended with the truth exposed before everyone. Ethan, in silence, allowed himself a breath. He had fulfilled what he had promised himself in the vestry. The truth was on the table, and the chapter was closed. Mr. Hamilton tries to save honor. My daughter has been manipulated, but no one believes him. The echo of revenge never fills the emptiness of the heart. 12 months had passed since Victoria's arrest, and the trial that ended in an exemplary conviction. Ethan had returned to his Long Island office, this time not as a deceived husband or as a wounded man, but as an architect who sought to reconnect with his craft and with himself. During that year, he avoided interviews, refused invitations, and quietly dedicated himself to new projects, focused on sustainability and the recovery of public spaces. He didn't want to be remembered only as the man who unmasked a ruined noble family, but as someone who truly built. One June afternoon, coinciding with the annual Architectural Preservation Gala, he was invited to present his ideas at a local convention. The atmosphere was festive, the streets adorned, and people enjoyed the summer. Ethan walked through the squares with a calm step, greeting those who recognized him, and felt lighter than he had in many months. The memory of Victoria's arrest still appeared in his mind sometimes. It did not do so with rage, but with a bitter taste that no longer dominated his life. He had understood that revenge had given him proof and justice, but not peace. That peace began to arrive when Jessica from Boston wrote him a letter thanking him for the opportunity to rebuild her life. In the text, the young woman acknowledged her mistake, apologized, and said that she had returned to work at her father's restaurant, helping him lift the business with humility. Ethan smiled as he read it. He understood that not everything was lost, that even those who fell into the trap could move forward if they chose the truth. The letter was a symbol that family is not only inherited, it is also rebuilt with acts of repair. The fair filled the city with sounds. Children ran through the streets. Elders commented aloud on the previous day's news. Musicians tuned their instruments, and groups of friends shared snacks on crowded terraces. In that simple and cheerful setting, Ethan felt part of a community. He had spent months feeling alone, isolated in his own pain. But now he recognized that life was made up of those small, everyday gestures that give meaning. At the convention, he presented a project for green squares and buildings with recycled materials. The audience listened with interest and applauded with enthusiasm. Ethan spoke of the importance of caring for the land to leave a dignified future for children. He said that architecture was extended family, because every construction affects the lives of those who inhabit it. Among the attendees was Samantha Sam Owens, an environmental engineer with a clear gaze and simple words. After the talk, she approached him to congratulate him. She spoke enthusiastically about his proposals and told him that she worked on similar river recovery projects. The conversation flowed naturally. Ethan listened to her and discovered an honest tone in her voice that reassured him. Sam did not see him as the protagonist of a scandal. She saw him as a colleague, passionate about building. They spent long minutes talking about techniques, local problems, and possible solutions. Ethan noticed that, for the first time in a long time, he was laughing sincerely. The afternoon progressed, and the fair filled the streets even more. Ethan and Sam walked together through the Central Park paths, stopped to try a piece of gourmet chocolate, and toasted with a glass of local wine. They mingled naturally in the crowd, without cameras, without uncomfortable questions. Ethan felt that the wound was beginning to close. It was not about falling in love immediately or forgetting the past all at once, but about allowing himself to trust someone again. Sam spoke of her family with affection, mentioning her parents and a brother who lived in Chicago. And Ethan listened attentively. In her words, he recognized the simple strength of bonds, the same strength he had sought throughout his life. Returning to the hotel, he found a second letter from Jessica. This time she told him that she had managed to stabilize the restaurant, that her father was proud, and that she, little by little, was regaining confidence in herself. The letter closed with a phrase that moved him. "Thank you for giving me a way out. I discovered that family is also chosen when someone lends you a hand." Ethan carefully saved the paper. He understood that justice was not only condemning the guilty, it was also accompanying those who chose to redeem themselves. The climax of this new beginning arrived on the last night of the convention. In the square, illuminated by lanterns, Ethan officially presented his project along with other colleagues. The audience applauded him strongly. At the end, Sam approached and told him that she would like to collaborate with him on future initiatives. Ethan looked at her and understood that life offered him a different path. He remembered the pain, the lies, the loneliness, but he also remembered that patience had sustained him. He smiled and replied yes, that it would be an honor to work together. They did not need grandiloquent promises, only the commitment to walk with honesty. The audience began to disperse, the musicians played a cheerful tune, and the children continued running with balloons in hand. Ethan looked around and took a deep breath. There was justice, there was redemption, and there was a future. That night, he did not feel the burden of the past as a slab, but as a lesson that had brought him there. As the New York bells rang loudly to announce the closing of the celebration, Ethan looked at Sam with serenity. He smiled genuinely and uttered a few words that were not a declaration of love, but a pact with life. "Now, yes, my life begins." In the last image this story leaves us, the echo of the bells in New York is still heard, and a man is seen who, after going through deceit and betrayals, manages to look to the future with calm. There is no shouting or revenge in his gaze, only the serenity of someone who has understood that life is not measured by the falls, but by the ability to get up and lend a hand to those who dare to rectify. Ethan's journey is also a mirror where we can all look at ourselves. Throughout the 10 chapters, we saw how deception turned into proof, how desperation gave way to justice, and how loneliness ended up opening up to the warmth of new relationships. But the essential was not Victoria's downfall or the humiliation of a noble family, but Jessica's simple and brave act of breaking her silence, Ethan's ability not to be consumed by resentment, and Sam's appearance as a symbol of a clean start. What remains engraved in memory is not the arrest scene, but the letters of repentance, the gestures of reconciliation, and the silent learning that a true family is built with acts of care and not with family names. The lesson that emerges is clear. The past is not erased, but it can be repaired. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is a constant work that allows us to walk lighter. And family, beyond blood and inheritance, is chosen every day in the way we care for, listen to, and protect our own. As an old saying goes, whoever sows with patience reaps with peace. Just as a lamp lit by the window guides walkers in the night, a simple gesture of love or repentance can open a new horizon for us, even when everything seemed lost. In closing, the invitation is to look around with other eyes. Perhaps there is someone nearby who needs a word of comfort, a gesture of trust, an opportunity to rebuild their path. Ethan's story reminds us that true victory is not defeating the other, but recovering our ability to trust, to forgive, and to build together. If this narration has touched your heart, share it as old fair songs are shared, from mouth to mouth, from house to house, so that its echo remains with us. Because in the end, life, like the bells of the city, only finds meaning when it rings for everyone.